They say money can't buy happiness, but it sure as hell can buy cruelty. I learned that lesson the hard way when the woman I loved, the woman I thought would be my forever, looked me dead in the eye and said, "You'll be nothing without my money." Nothing. Those words still echo in my head sometimes, usually right before I fall asleep. But now, 3 years later, as I sit in my corner office watching her twins, my employees, scramble to meet their quarterly targets, I can't help but smile. Because she was wrong. Dead wrong. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that I was 26 when I met Victoria Hartwell, and she was 34. A successful real estate mogul with more money than God and an ego to match. I was fresh out of college, working as a junior analyst at a small investment firm, barely making ends meet in my studio apartment that smelled perpetually of the Chinese takeout place downstairs. Victoria was everything I wasn't. Polished, confident, dripping in designer clothes and driving cars that cost more than my annual salary. We met at a networking event that I'd crashed, honestly. My boss had given me one ticket to the Young Professionals in Finance mixer, but I knew I didn't belong there. Everyone else was wearing suits that probably cost more than my rent, discussing vacation homes in the Hamptons and investment portfolios, while I nursed a single beer and tried to look like I wasn't completely out of my depth. Victoria approached me at the bar. I remember thinking she looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Perfectly blown out blonde hair, a black dress that probably had a designer label I'd never heard of, and this smile that made my heart skip a beat. She was magnetic in a way that made everyone else fade into background noise. "You look lost," she said, sliding up next to me with this amused smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "That obvious?" I replied, trying to play it cool despite feeling like a fraud in my one good suit, the same one I'd worn to every job interview for the past 6 months. Refreshingly so. She laughed, and the sound was like music. "I'm Victoria, and you are clearly not one of these trust fund babies pretending to be entrepreneurs." That should have been my first red flag. The way she said it, like being poor was quaint or charming rather than a daily struggle. But I was young and stupid and completely mesmerized by this sophisticated woman who seemed genuinely interested in me. We talked for hours that night. She told me about her real estate empire, how she'd built it from the ground up after inheriting a small sum from her grandmother. She made it sound like she was self-made, conveniently leaving out the part about the small sum being $3 million. I told her about my dreams of starting my own investment firm someday, how I was working 60-hour weeks and taking night classes to get my CFA certification. Ambition, she said, touching my arm in a way that made my skin tingle. I like that in a man. We started dating 2 weeks later. I say dating, but really Victoria swept me into her world like a hurricane. Suddenly, I was eating at restaurants where the wine cost more than my car payment, staying at her penthouse apartment in Manhattan with its floor-to-ceiling windows and art that she claimed was investment pieces. She bought me clothes, expensive ones, claiming she couldn't be seen with someone wearing off-the-rack suits. "Think of it as an investment in your future," she'd say whenever I protested. "You can't network with important people looking like you shop at discount stores." At first, it felt like a fairy tale. I was living a life I'd only seen in movies, and Victoria seemed genuinely proud to have me on her arm. She'd introduced me to her friends and business associates as my brilliant boyfriend, and I felt like I was finally becoming the person I'd always wanted to be. But fairy tales always have a dark side, don't they? The first crack in the facade came about 6 months in. We were at dinner with some of her investor friends, old money types who spoke in code about their various holdings and complained about tax implications on their third homes. I was trying to contribute to the conversation, sharing some insights about an emerging market trend I'd been tracking, when Victoria cut me off mid-sentence. "Darling, you're getting a bit technical," she said with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "These gentlemen don't need a lecture on market fundamentals." The table fell silent for a moment, and I felt my face burn with embarrassment. One of the men, a silver-haired type who probably hadn't worked a day in his life, chuckled uncomfortably and changed the subject to golf. Later that night, when I brought it up, Victoria waved off my concerns. "Yeah, you were boring them," she said matter-of-factly, not looking up from her phone. "You need to learn to read the room better. These people don't want to be educated by someone who..." She trailed off, but I knew what she was going to say. "Someone who used to eat ramen for dinner because it was all I could afford." I should have seen it then, the way she was slowly chipping away at my confidence, making me doubt my own worth. But I was too grateful for the life she'd given me, too afraid of losing it all and going back to my old existence. The pattern continued for months. In public, I was arm candy, presentable enough to bring to her events, intelligent enough to hold basic conversations, but never quite good enough to be an equal partner. In private, she made it clear that I owed everything to her generosity. Where would you be without me? Became her favorite rhetorical question, usually deployed after she'd paid for something expensive or introduced me to someone important. Still living in that rat hole studio, eating takeout every night? I started working harder, pushing myself to prove that I could contribute something meaningful to our relationship. I landed a better job at a mid-tier investment firm, doubling my salary practically overnight. I thought Victoria would be proud, excited that I was finally pulling my own weight. Instead, she seemed almost irritated by my success. "It's cute that you think that little promotion makes you independent," she said when I told her about the new position. "You do realize your salary is still pocket change compared to what I make in a month, right?" The words stung, but I convinced myself she was just having a bad day. Victoria's business had been struggling lately. Something about a development project that was over budget and behind schedule. I figured she was taking her stress out on me. I was such an idiot. The twins entered our lives about a year into our relationship. Sophia and Marcus were Victoria's children from her first marriage, 17-year-old seniors in high school who lived with their father during the week and stayed with Victoria on weekends. She'd mentioned them before, but always in passing, like they were accessories rather than actual human beings. Meeting them was complicated. They were polite enough, but I could see the calculation in their eyes, especially Sophia's. She had her mother's sharp intelligence and her father's old money smugness. A dangerous combination in a teenager. "So you're mom's boy toy," she said the first time we met, looking me up and down like I was a piece of furniture she was considering buying. "Sophia," Victoria warned, but there was no real heat in it. If anything, she seemed amused by her daughter's rudeness. Marcus was quieter but no less judgmental. He had this way of looking at me like I was something unpleasant he'd stepped in. Always polite on the surface, but with an underlying current of disdain that made my skin crawl. Victoria never corrected their behavior. If anything, she encouraged it, treating their casual cruelty toward me as some kind of family bonding exercise. They're protective of me, she'd explain later. "They've seen me with men who only wanted my money before." The irony wasn't lost on me, considering I was apparently the latest in that line of men, according to her children's perspective. But I persevered, convinced that if I just worked hard enough, proved myself enough, I could earn their respect and Victoria's genuine love. I threw myself into my career with renewed vigor, working 14-hour days and networking every spare moment I had. My new boss, a sharp-eyed woman named Janet Reeves, noticed my dedication and began giving me increasingly important accounts to manage. "You've got good instincts," she told me during one of our weekly check-ins, "and you're not afraid to take calculated risks. That's rare in this business." Her praise meant more to me than any compliment Victoria had ever given me, mainly because it felt earned rather than patronizing. Meanwhile, my relationship with Victoria was deteriorating. The more successful I became, the more critical she grew. When I closed a major deal that netted the firm 7 figures in fees, she dismissed it as beginner's luck. When I was featured in a trade publication's 30 Under 30 list, she called it a vanity piece that no one important actually reads. Nothing I did was ever good enough. I was always too eager, too loud, too presumptuous. I needed to remember my place. The breaking point came on a cold February evening, almost 2 years into our relationship. I'd just been offered a partnership track at my firm, something that would have been unthinkable when I first met Victoria. I was over the moon, convinced that this promotion would finally prove to her that I was worthy of being her equal. I planned the perfect evening to share the news. I made dinner reservations at the restaurant where we'd had our first official date, bought flowers, even splurged on a bottle of champagne that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. I was going to prove to her that I wasn't just someone she'd rescued from poverty. I was someone who could stand beside her as an equal partner. Victoria was late as usual. She swept into the restaurant 45 minutes after our reservation time, checking her phone and barely acknowledging my presence. She looked stunning as always. A black dress that probably cost more than my car, diamond earrings that caught the candlelight like stars. But there was something cold in her demeanor, a distance that I couldn't quite place. "Sorry I'm late," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "The Jakarta project is hemorrhaging money, and I had to fire 3 people today." I expressed my sympathies, trying to gauge her mood. She seemed more frustrated than upset, talking about the incompetence of her employees and the unreliability of international contractors. I waited for her to vent, thinking maybe my good news would brighten her spirits. Finally, when she paused to take a sip of wine, I seized my moment. "I have some news," I said, unable to keep the excitement out of my voice. "Janet offered me the partnership track today. It comes with a base salary increase of 40% plus profit sharing. If everything goes well, I could be making partner within 3 years." I waited for her smile, her congratulations, her pride in my achievement. Instead, Victoria set down her wine glass and looked at me with something that might have been pity. "That's nice, sweetheart," she said in the tone one might use to praise a child's crayon drawing. "Though I have to ask, do you really think you're ready for that kind of responsibility? You've only been at the firm for 18 months. The words hit me like a slap. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe you should consider whether this is the right move for your career. Partnership track positions come with a lot of pressure, a lot of expectations. Are you sure you can handle that without support?" The way she said support made it clear she was talking about her money, her connections, her influence, as if my success was somehow dependent on her largesse. "Victoria, I earned this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My track record speaks for itself. I've consistently outperformed my targets, my clients trust me, and Janet specifically said she was impressed with my independent thinking." Victoria's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Independent thinking? Darling, you do realize that half your clients came through introductions I made, right? And that lovely suit you wore to your interview? The one that made such a good impression? I bought that for you." My face burned with humiliation, but I pushed forward. "That doesn't negate my performance. I'm the one who closed those deals. I'm the one who built those relationships. Yes, you opened some doors for me, but I'm the one who walked through them." "Are you—" Victoria's voice was getting colder by the minute. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a very expensive charity case who's forgotten where he came from." The restaurant seemed to fade around us. Other diners continued their conversations. The waitstaff continued their service. But all I could hear was the sound of my heart pounding in my chest. What are you saying?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying me with those calculating eyes I'd once found so attractive. "I'm saying that maybe it's time you remembered what you'd be without my help. What you were before I found you at that pathetic networking event, drinking cheap beer and wearing a suit you probably bought at a department store clearance sale." Her words were like ice water in my veins, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Victoria, where is this coming from? I thought you'd be happy for me." "Happy for you." She laughed again, and this time there was genuine cruelty in it. "Why would I be happy about my boyfriend deluding himself into thinking he's something he's not? And what am I exactly?" The question came out harder than I intended. Victoria's smile was razor sharp. "You're nothing, sweetheart. You were nothing when I met you, and you'd be nothing without my money, my connections, my reputation. The only reason people take you seriously is because they see you with me. The only reason Janet offered you that position is because she knows I'm your girlfriend and she wants to stay on my good side." The words hit me like physical blows. I sat there staring at this woman I thought I loved, wondering when she'd become so cruel, so dismissive of everything I'd worked for. "That's not true," I said quietly. "Isn't it?" Victoria pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. "Should we call Janet right now? Ask her if the fact that you're dating Victoria Hartwell influenced her decision to offer you that partnership track?" The suggestion made my stomach turn because part of me, a small, insecure part that Victoria had been carefully nurturing for 2 years, wondered if she might be right. Had my success been a sham all along? "You know what your problem is?" Victoria continued, apparently not done eviscerating me. "You think you become something special, but you're still the same desperate little boy I met 2 years ago. The only difference is that now you're wearing better clothes." I felt something break inside me then. Not my heart, that would come later. This was something deeper, something that had been holding me back for months. It was the part of me that had been grateful for Victoria's attention, grateful to be chosen by someone so far out of my league. The part that had been willing to accept her criticism and her casual cruelty because I thought I deserved it. You're wrong," I said, and my voice was steadier than I expected. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? You're wrong about me. You're wrong about my success. And you're wrong if you think I'm going to sit here and let you tear me down because you're having a bad day." For the first time since I'd known her, Victoria looked genuinely surprised. "What did you just say to me?" I said, "You're wrong." I stood up, pulling out my wallet and throwing enough cash on the table to cover dinner and tip. I've spent 2 years trying to prove myself to you, trying to earn your respect, your love, your basic human decency. But I see now that was impossible from the start because you never saw me as a person worth respecting. Victoria's face was flushing red, but I didn't stop. You want to know what I was before I met you? I was someone with dreams and ambitions and the drive to achieve them. I was someone who worked 60 hours a week and still found time to better himself. I was someone who treated other people with basic kindness and respect, even when they didn't have anything to offer me in return. I paused, looking down at her shocked expression. And you want to know what you are? You're someone so insecure about your own worth that you have to tear down the people closest to you to feel important. You're someone who inherited money and thinks that makes you better than people who actually work for their success. You're a bully and a snob, and I'm done letting you make me feel small. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria stared up at me with something between rage and disbelief, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she found her voice. How dare you speak to me like that? After everything I've done for you? What have you done for me, Victoria? Really? You've bought me clothes and taken me to fancy dinners and introduced me to people who look down on me almost as much as you do. You've made me doubt my own abilities and question my own worth. You've turned me into someone I don't recognize. Someone grateful for scraps of affection and too afraid to stand up for himself. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair. Sam, thank you for the lesson. I'll be out of your apartment by tomorrow. You'll regret this, Victoria called after me as I walked away. You'll come crawling back within a week, and when you do, don't expect me to be waiting. I turned back one last time, and I'll never forget the look on her face. Pure, undiluted fury mixed with something that might have been panic. For just a moment, I saw through the polished facade to the insecure woman underneath, the one who needed to control everyone around her to feel secure. No, I said simply. I won't. And I walked out of that restaurant and out of Victoria Hartwell's life, thinking I'd never see her again. God, I was naive. The next few months were the hardest of my life, but also the most liberating. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in Queens. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I threw myself into work with the intensity that surprised even Janet, closing deal after deal and building a reputation that had nothing to do with Victoria's connections. The partnership track position was real. Janet confirmed it in our next meeting, looking genuinely confused when I asked if my relationship with Victoria had influenced her decision. Why would your love life affect my business decisions? She asked. I offered you the position because you're the best junior analyst I've seen in 15 years. Your relationship status is irrelevant. That conversation did more for my self-confidence than 2 years with Victoria ever had. But healing from emotional abuse isn't linear, and there were days when Victoria's words echoed in my head, making me question everything I'd achieved. The hardest moments came late at night when I was alone in my new apartment, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake, if I really would amount to nothing without her money and connections. Those doubts drove me to work even harder. I started my own investment blog, sharing market analysis and insights that quickly gained a following among industry professionals. I took on speaking engagements at finance conferences, built relationships with other young professionals who actually respected my opinion. Slowly, I began to see myself the way others saw me, not as Victoria's charity case, but as a competent professional with valuable insights and a bright future. 6 months after our breakup, I made partner. Not partner track, full partner. Janet called me into her office on a Friday afternoon, looking pleased with herself. Congratulations, she said, sliding a contract across her desk. The board voted unanimously. Your profit sharing kicks in immediately, and you'll have full autonomy over your client portfolio. I stared at the contract, at my name printed in bold letters next to the word partner, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pure, uncomplicated pride in my own accomplishments. That weekend, I celebrated by buying my first real piece of art. Not an investment piece, like Victoria's pretentious sculptures, but a painting I genuinely loved by a local artist who was just starting to gain recognition. I hung it in my living room and sat on my secondhand couch, drinking beer from a bottle and admiring something beautiful that I'd chosen for myself. It was perfect. The universe, however, has a twisted sense of humor. A year later, Janet approached me with an opportunity that would change everything. A major investment firm in Manhattan was looking to acquire smaller firms to expand their portfolio management division. They'd specifically requested to meet with me after reading some of my published analysis and seeing my track record. This could be big for you, Janet said. If they like what they see, They might offer you a senior partner position. We're talking about a salary that would put you in the top 10% of earners in the city. The firm was Hartwell and Associates Investment Management. Yes, that Hartwell. I should have walked away the moment I heard the name. Should have told Janet I wasn't interested. Found another opportunity. Avoided the whole mess entirely. But there was something poetic about the possibility of succeeding in a company that shared Victoria's last name. Something that appealed to the part of me that still wanted to prove her wrong. The meeting was set for the following Monday. I spent the weekend preparing, researching the firm's history and recent performance. What I found was interesting. Hartwell and Associates had been founded by Victoria's ex-husband, Richard Hartwell, but he'd sold his shares 3 years ago to focus on other investments. The current CEO was a woman named Patricia Morgan, a former Goldman Sachs executive with an impressive track record. There was no mention of Victoria anywhere in the company materials. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of October day that makes New York feel full of possibility. I put on my best suit, one I'd bought for myself with my own money, and made my way to the gleaming Manhattan office tower that housed Hartwell and Associates. The office was everything I'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern art, expensive furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. But there was something different about the energy here. Something more professional and less performative than the spaces Victoria had introduced me to. Patricia Morgan was waiting for me in the conference room, along with 2 other senior partners. She was probably in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that reminded me of Janet's. Professional, competent, no nonsense. Mr. Thompson, she said, standing to shake my hand. Thank you for coming in. I've been following your work for some time. The meeting went better than I could have hoped. We discussed market trends, investment strategies, my vision for portfolio management in an increasingly complex global economy. Patricia and her colleagues asked tough questions, challenged my assumptions, pushed me to defend my positions. It was exactly the kind of intellectual sparring match I thrived on. An hour in, Patricia leaned back in her chair and smiled. I'll be direct. We want you, senior partner, full equity stake, complete autonomy over your division. You'd be our youngest senior partner ever, but your track record speaks for itself. The offer was generous, more than generous. It was life-changing money, the kind of position I'd dreamed about since college. But there was something I needed to know. Can I ask about the company name? I said carefully. Hartwell is a fairly uncommon surname. Is there any connection to Victoria Hartwell, the real estate developer? Patricia's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. Victoria Hartwell is Richard's ex-wife. Why do you ask? We have history, I said diplomatically. I want to make sure there won't be any conflicts of interest. What kind of history? This came from one of the other partners, a stern-looking man named David Chen. I took a breath, deciding honesty was the best policy. We dated for about 2 years. It ended badly. I just want to ensure that any personal animosity won't affect business relationships. Patricia and David exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. Then Patricia leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. Mr. Thompson, I'm going to share some information with you that's not public knowledge yet. Victoria Hartwell's company is in serious financial trouble. The Jakarta project she's been working on for the past 3 years has collapsed completely. Cost overruns, regulatory issues, contractor fraud. She's leveraged everything to try to save it, but it's not enough. We estimate she'll be filing for bankruptcy within the next 6 months. The words hit me like a physical blow. Victoria bankrupt? The woman who'd told me I'd be nothing without her money was about to lose everything? There's more, Patricia continued. Richard has been quietly divesting himself of any financial obligations to Victoria since their divorce was finalized. That includes the trust funds he set up for the twins. As of last month, Sophia and Marcus Hartwell are no longer beneficiaries of their father's estate. What does that mean? I asked, though I was starting to get a very clear picture. It means they're going to need jobs, David said bluntly. Both of them just graduated from college. Sophia with a business degree, Marcus with finance. They've been living off their trust funds and their mother's money, but that's about to disappear. Patricia was watching my face carefully. Richard has asked us to consider them for entry-level positions. He feels some obligation toward them, even though they're not technically his responsibility anymore. They're both intelligent, well-educated, but they have no real work experience. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Victoria's children, the same children who'd looked at me like I was something unpleasant they'd stepped in, We're going to need jobs at the company where I might become a senior partner, where I would be their boss. I want to be very clear, Patricia said. Your decision about this position should have nothing to do with the Hartwell family situation. You're being offered this role because you're an exceptional talent, not because of any personal connections or grudges. If you take the position, I expect you to treat any Hartwell employees with the same professionalism you'd show any other colleague. I nodded, understanding the subtext. She was telling me that revenge fantasies had no place in her company, but she was also telling me that I would be in a position of power over the people who treated me like garbage for 2 years. I need some time to think about it, I said. Of course. Take the weekend, but I'll need an answer by Monday. This kind of opportunity won't wait indefinitely. I left that meeting in a daze, walking the streets of Manhattan as my mind raced through the possibilities. Victoria, broke and desperate. Her children, forced to work for the first time in their privileged lives. And me, in a position to determine their professional futures. The irony was almost too perfect to be real. That weekend was the longest of my life. I called Janet and talked through the professional aspects of the opportunity, the salary, the equity stake, the potential for growth. From a career standpoint, it was a no-brainer. This was the kind of position that could set me up for life. But there was more to consider than just money and prestige. There was the question of what kind of person I wanted to be, what kind of professional I wanted to become. Did I want to be someone who used his position to settle old scores? Or did I want to be someone who rose above past hurts and focused on building something meaningful? I thought about Victoria's words from that last dinner. You're nothing without my money. For 2 years, I'd carried that phrase like a weight around my neck, letting it drive me to prove her wrong. And I had proven her wrong spectacularly. I'd built a successful career entirely on my own merits, earned the respect of my colleagues, achieved everything I dreamed of when I was that nervous young man at the networking event. The question was, what did I want to do with that success? By Sunday evening, I'd made my decision. Monday morning, I called Patricia Morgan and accepted the position. I started at Hartwell & Associates on a Monday in November, exactly 3 years and 2 months after Victoria had told me I'd be nothing without her money. The irony of that timing wasn't lost on me as I settled into my corner office. Yes, corner office. On the 32nd floor with a view of Central Park that probably cost more per month than my old studio apartment. Patricia had given me 2 weeks to get acclimated before the Hartwell twins were scheduled to start. 2 weeks to decide exactly how I wanted to handle what was about to become the most delicate professional situation of my career. Because despite what I'd told myself about taking the high road, there was a part of me, a dark, vindictive part that I wasn't entirely proud of, that was savoring the approaching reversal of fortune. My first day, I spent hours reviewing personnel files and departmental budgets, getting a feel for the company culture and expectations. Hartwell & Associates was everything Victoria's world had pretended to be, genuinely professional, merit-based, focused on results rather than appearances. The other senior partners treated me as an equal from day one, respecting my expertise and seeking my input on major decisions. You're going to fit in well here, Patricia told me during our first weekly check-in. The team's already impressed with your insights on the Morrison portfolio restructuring. But even as I threw myself into the work, part of my mind was occupied with strategic planning. Not revenge exactly. I kept telling myself it wasn't revenge. It was simply justice, a natural consequence of choices made and words spoken. Victoria had created this situation with her arrogance and cruelty. I was just going to be present to witness the results. The bankruptcy filing made the business section of the Times on a Thursday morning. Real estate developer Victoria Hartwell files for Chapter 11. Read the headline, accompanied by a photo of Victoria looking haggard and defensive outside a courthouse in Lower Manhattan. The article detailed the collapse of her Jakarta project, the cascading failures that had brought down her entire empire, the estimated $50 million in losses. I read it twice over my coffee, studying Victoria's face in the photograph. She looked older, worn down in a way I'd never seen during our relationship. The woman who'd once commanded every room she entered now looked small and defeated, clutching a cheap handbag, not the designer accessories she'd once carried like trophies. There was a knock on my office door. "Come in," I called, quickly folding the newspaper. It was David Chen, one of the senior partners who'd been in my interview. "Have you seen this morning's Times?" he asked, holding up his own copy of the business section. "Just finished reading it," I replied carefully. David studied my face for a moment. "You okay? I know this can't be easy given your history with her, I'm fine, I said and realized I meant it. Actually, I'm better than fine. This doesn't affect me anymore. And that was true. Reading about Victoria's downfall, I'd expected to feel satisfaction, vindication, maybe even a twisted sense of joy. Instead, I felt nothing. She was no longer someone who could hurt me or diminish my achievements. She was just another person who'd made bad business decisions and was facing the consequences. But her children were a different matter entirely. David nodded approvingly. Good, because they're starting Monday. That Friday, I received an email from HR with the personnel files for Sophia and Marcus Hartwell. Two fresh college graduates with impressive degrees and absolutely no work experience. Sophia had majored in business administration at Columbia, graduating summa cum laude. Marcus had studied finance at New York University, also with honors. On paper, they looked like promising candidates. I spent the weekend reviewing their academic records, recommendation letters from professors, and the brief personal statements they'd submitted with their applications. Sophia's statement was all ambition and buzzwords, leveraging synergistic opportunities and driving innovative solutions in dynamic markets. It read like she'd swallowed a business textbook and regurgitated it onto paper. Marcus's statement was more subdued but equally vapid. He wrote about contributing to organizational excellence and applying analytical frameworks to optimize portfolio performance. Neither statement showed any real personality or genuine passion for the work. But what struck me most was what wasn't in their files: any mention of their mother's bankruptcy, their father's disinheritance, or the fact that they were taking these positions out of financial necessity rather than career ambition. They were maintaining the fiction that this was a choice rather than a desperate last resort. That gave me an idea. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of New York weather that makes everyone look like they'd rather be anywhere else. I got to the office early, wanting to be settled and composed when the twins arrived. My assistant, Claire, had scheduled them for orientation at 9 a.m., followed by individual meetings with me at 10 and 10:30. I was reviewing quarterly reports when Claire buzzed my intercom. Mr. Thompson? Sophia Hartwell is here for her orientation. Send her in, I said, closing the reports and standing to greet her. Sophia entered my office like she was walking into a boardroom she already owned. She was 22 years old but carried herself with the practiced confidence of someone who'd never been told no, never been made to feel small or insignificant. Her handshake was firm, her smile perfectly calibrated, her outfit clearly expensive despite the family's recent financial troubles. Mr. Thompson, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk with casual familiarity. It's so good to see you again. The audacity of that greeting, as if we were old friends catching up rather than former adversaries in a dramatically altered power dynamic, took my breath away. She was either incredibly naive or playing some kind of long game I didn't understand yet. Sophia, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Congratulations on graduating. Columbia, wasn't it? Yes, in summa cum laude, she said with the kind of casual pride that suggested academic achievement had always come easily to her. I'm excited to apply what I learned in a real business environment. And why Hartwell and Associates specifically? I asked, genuinely curious about how she'd frame this. Well, the company has an excellent reputation in the industry, she said, launching into what sounded like a rehearsed answer. And I'm particularly interested in the kind of innovative portfolio management strategies you've been implementing since joining the firm. She'd done her homework, I'd give her that. But there was something about the way she delivered the compliment, as if she were conferring a favor by acknowledging my work, that reminded me exactly why I disliked her so much during my relationship with her mother. I see, I said. And you're comfortable starting in an entry-level position? Given your academic achievements, I imagine you have other options. For the first time, Sophia's composure cracked slightly. A flash of something, frustration, embarrassment, crossed her face before she recovered. I believe in learning from the ground up, she said, understanding every aspect of the business before taking on greater responsibilities. It was a good answer, the kind of thing they probably taught in business school. But we both knew it was bullshit. She was here because she needed a job, not because she wanted to learn from the ground up. Excellent attitude, I said, making a note in her file. Let's talk about your initial assignment. I'd spent considerable time crafting the perfect entry-level position for Sophia. It was legitimate work, nothing that could be construed as harassment or discrimination. But it was also exactly the kind of detailed, unglamorous grunt work that someone with her background would find educational. You'll be working in our research division, I explained, supporting our senior analysts with market research and data compilation. Your immediate supervisor will be Jennifer Walsh. She's one of our most thorough analysts, very detail-oriented. Jennifer was also someone I'd specifically chosen for this role. She was brilliant, demanding, and had absolutely no patience for entitled attitudes or sloppy work. If anyone could teach Sophia the value of hard work and attention to detail, it would be Jennifer. Research sounds perfect, Sophia said, though I caught a slight tightening around her eyes. I'm eager to contribute. I'm sure you are, I replied smoothly. Jennifer will explain your specific responsibilities, but essentially you'll be gathering data on emerging markets, cross-referencing financial reports, and preparing preliminary analysis summaries for review. The work requires extreme attention to detail. A single error in data compilation can cascade into major problems for our clients. Jennifer has very high standards, but she's an excellent teacher for someone willing to learn. I handed her Jennifer's contact information and a thick folder of orientation materials. Your first assignment is to complete a comprehensive analysis of Southeast Asian textile markets over the past 5 years. Jennifer will want that on her desk by Friday. Sophia took the folder, her smile becoming slightly strained as she felt its weight. Friday. Of course. Any questions? Just one, she said, and for a moment her carefully constructed professionalism slipped. This feels a bit surreal, doesn't it? You being my boss after everything? There it was, the acknowledgement of our history that she'd been dancing around since walking into my office. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. Does it? I asked mildly. I'm not sure what you mean. Sophia shifted uncomfortably. I just meant, with you and Mom, the way things ended. Your mother and I had a relationship that concluded 3 years ago. I said, my voice remaining perfectly professional. That has no bearing on our current working relationship. I expect you to perform your duties to the best of your abilities, and you can expect fair and professional treatment in return. But if you're concerned about conflicts of interest, I'm happy to discuss reassigning you to another senior partner. The suggestion clearly alarmed her. No, that's not necessary. I'm sure we can maintain appropriate professional boundaries. Excellent, I said, standing to signal the end of our meeting. Jennifer's expecting you at 10:30. Don't be late, she values punctuality. After Sophia left, I took a moment to process what had just happened. She tried to acknowledge our shared history, perhaps hoping to establish some kind of personal connection that might smooth her path in the company. Instead, I'd made it clear that the past was irrelevant and that she'd received no special treatment, positive or negative, based on our history. It was a small power play, but an important one. I was establishing the rules of engagement. This was my domain now, and she was just another entry-level employee who needed to prove herself. Marcus arrived for his 10:30 appointment, looking nervous in a way his sister hadn't. Where Sophia had projected confidence, Marcus seemed uncertain, almost apologetic. He was taller than I remembered, with his father's aristocratic features, but his mother's calculating eyes. Mr. Thompson, he said, shaking my hand with what felt like genuine respect. Thank you for this opportunity. Interesting. No presumption of friendship, no casual familiarity. Either Marcus had better manners than his sister, or he had a clearer understanding of their changed circumstances. Marcus, I replied, gesturing for him to sit. How are you adjusting to post-graduation life? It's been a transition, he said carefully. A lot of changes recently. I appreciated the honesty, even if it was diplomatically phrased. Change can be challenging, I agreed, but it also creates opportunities for growth. Tell me about your interest in finance. What draws you to this field? Unlike his sister's rehearsed responses, Marcus seemed to consider the question genuinely. I've always been fascinated by market psychology, he said. The way that human emotions and behavioral patterns drive financial decisions, often in ways that seem completely irrational. During college, I wrote my senior thesis on cognitive biases in investment decision-making. How things like loss aversion and confirmation bias create predictable market inefficiencies. Now that was interesting. It was the first thing either twin had said that suggested genuine intellectual curiosity rather than career opportunism. Behavioral finance is a growing field, I said. We've started incorporating psychological insights into our portfolio management strategies. What's your take on the efficient market hypothesis? For the next 10 minutes, we had an actual conversation about market theory and behavioral economics. Marcus was intelligent, well-read, and capable of defending his positions under questioning. More importantly, he seemed genuinely passionate about the subject matter. But then I noticed something that made me reconsider my impression of him. Throughout our discussion, Marcus kept checking his watch. Not obviously, but frequently enough that I picked up on it. And there was something in his expression, a kind of calculating patience, that reminded me uncomfortably of his mother. "Am I keeping you from something?" I asked mildly. Marcus flushed. "No, not at all. I apologize if I seemed distracted. I was just, this is a big day, you know. Starting my career, meeting my new boss." He paused, then added with what seemed like carefully crafted vulnerability, "Especially given our history." There it was again, the attempt to acknowledge our shared past, to create some kind of personal connection. But where Sophia had been direct, Marcus was being manipulative, playing the humble, grateful card to try to win my sympathy. "I'm glad you brought that up," I said, deciding to address this head-on. "I want to be very clear about something. The fact that I once dated your mother has no bearing on how I'll evaluate your performance here. You'll succeed or fail based entirely on your own efforts and abilities." "I wouldn't want it any other way," Marcus said quickly. "Good. Then let's discuss your assignment." I designed Marcus's entry-level position as carefully as I had Sophia's. He'd be working in our compliance division, reviewing trade documentation, and ensuring regulatory adherence. It was detail-oriented work that required absolute precision and offered zero glamour. Exactly the kind of job that would teach him the unglamorous reality of financial services. "You'll be reporting to Robert Kim in our compliance department," I explained. "He's former SEC, very thorough, takes regulatory requirements extremely seriously." Robert was also someone who had absolutely no tolerance for shortcuts or entitled attitudes. He'd grown up working class in Queens, put himself through law school, and had zero patience for people who thought rules didn't apply to them. "Your primary responsibility will be reviewing trading documentation for compliance violations," I continued. "Every trade has to be documented according to SEC requirements, and any errors can result in significant penalties for the firm. It's not glamorous work, but it's essential. And it will give you a comprehensive understanding of how the regulatory framework shapes everything we do." Marcus nodded, though I could see the disappointment in his eyes. This wasn't the exciting, high-level finance work he'd probably imagined when he applied. "Robert will explain the specific procedures, but I want to emphasize how important accuracy is in this role. Even small errors can have major consequences." "Questions?" "Just one," Marcus said, echoing his sister's earlier words. "I want you to know that I really appreciate this opportunity. I know things between you and Mom ended badly, and it would have been easy for you to not give us a chance." The gratitude seemed genuine, but there was something calculated about the timing and phrasing. He was trying to position himself as the reasonable, appreciative sibling, in contrast to whatever impression Sophia might have made. "As I told your sister," I said evenly, "your mother and I concluded our relationship 3 years ago. Ancient history. You're here because Patricia Morgan believes you have potential, not because of any personal considerations." "Of course," Marcus said quickly. "I just wanted you to know that I don't take this for granted." After both twins had left for their orientation sessions, I sat in my office feeling oddly deflated. I'd expected this first encounter to be more satisfying somehow. A clear moment of triumph where I could savor the reversal of our positions. Instead, I felt like I'd just completed a routine business meeting with 2 entry-level employees. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the real victory wasn't in some dramatic confrontation, but in the simple fact that they were now my employees, subject to my evaluation and dependent on my assessment of their performance. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and they both knew it. Over the next few weeks, I watched their progress with the kind of attention I'd never paid to entry-level employees before. Jennifer Walsh provided regular updates on Sophia's work, and they weren't encouraging. "She's struggling with the detail work," Jennifer told me during one of our weekly check-ins. The Southeast Asia textile analysis she turned in was superficial at best. She hit the main points but missed crucial subtleties in the trade data. When I asked her to revise it, she seemed surprised that I wasn't satisfied with her first draft. Like she expected praise for turning in something that met the minimum requirements. "How is she responding to feedback?" I asked. Jennifer grimaced. "Not well. She gets defensive when I point out errors, and I get the impression she thinks the work is beneath her. Yesterday, she asked when she'd be moved to more strategic responsibilities." "After 3 weeks," I said, not bothering to hide my amusement. "After 3 weeks. I told her that mastering the fundamentals was a prerequisite for advancement, but she didn't seem to take that well." Marcus was having a different kind of struggle. Robert Kim's reports were more positive in terms of work quality. Marcus was detail-oriented and rarely made errors in his compliance reviews. But there were other concerns. He's competent, Robert told me, but there's something, I don't know how to put this politely. He seems to think he's slumming it, like he's doing us a favor by working in compliance instead of the other way around. Has he said anything specific? Not directly, but he makes comments about learning the business from the ground up and paying his dues that suggest he sees this as temporary grunt work before moving on to more important things. He also keeps asking about the timeline for advancement, like he expects to be promoted after some predetermined period, regardless of performance. This was exactly what I'd expected. Both twins were struggling with the reality of actual work, the kind of unglamorous, detail-oriented labor that formed the foundation of any successful business. They'd been raised to expect success without effort, advancement without proving themselves. But it was what happened in week 4 that really crystallized the situation. I was working late on a Thursday evening, reviewing proposals for a potential acquisition, when Claire buzzed my intercom. "Mr. Thompson? Sophia Hartwell is here. She says she needs to speak with you urgently." I checked my watch, 7:30 p.m. Most of the office had cleared out hours ago. "Send her in." Sophia entered looking frazzled in a way I'd never seen during our previous encounters. Her usually perfect hair was slightly mussed, her designer blouse wrinkled, and there was something desperate in her eyes that reminded me uncomfortably of her mother's expression in that newspaper photograph. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk without being invited. "I need to talk to you about my performance review." Jennifer had submitted her monthly evaluation that afternoon, and it hadn't been favorable. Sophia was here to contest it. "What about it?" I asked mildly. "I think there might be some misunderstanding about my capabilities," Sophia said, launching into what was clearly a prepared speech. "I know Jennifer has concerns about my detail work, but I think she's focusing too much on minor technical issues and missing the bigger picture of my contributions." "What bigger picture?" "Well, for instance, in the textile analysis, I identified several key trend patterns that weren't explicitly mentioned in the raw data. I was looking at strategic implications rather than just compiling statistics. I'd read both Sophia's original analysis and Jennifer's detailed critique. What Sophia was calling strategic implications were mostly unsupported generalizations based on incomplete data review. Jennifer's feedback indicated that your analysis missed several important data points and contained factual errors," I said carefully. "Those aren't minor technical issues. They're fundamental problems that could mislead clients." Sophia's composure slipped slightly. "I think you're both being unfairly critical. At Columbia, my professors consistently praised my analytical thinking and strategic insight." "This isn't Columbia," I replied. "This is a professional environment where accuracy and attention to detail can mean the difference between profit and significant financial loss for our clients. But I'm capable of more than data compilation," Sophia insisted, her voice rising slightly. "I have an MBA-level education. I should be working on strategic projects, not grunt work that any college intern could handle." And there it was, the entitled attitude that had been simmering beneath her professional facade for weeks, finally bubbling to the surface. She thought the work was beneath her, thought she deserved better assignments based on her educational credentials, rather than her actual performance. "Sophia," I said, keeping my voice level, "let me explain something about how this company works. Every senior partner, including myself, started with detail work. Patricia Morgan spent 2 years reviewing regulatory filings before she was allowed near client portfolios. David Chen worked in compliance for 18 months before transitioning to investment analysis. The detail work isn't punishment or hazing, it's education. You can't develop strategic thinking without first understanding the fundamentals that inform strategy." "But I already understand the fundamentals," Sophia protested. "I studied them extensively in school. Academic understanding and practical application are very different things," I replied. "Your textile analysis demonstrated that clearly. You understood the theoretical frameworks but missed the practical details that would have changed your conclusions." Sophia was quiet for a moment, and I could see her struggling with frustration and something that might have been panic. Finally, she looked up at me with an expression I recognized from her mother's playbook. "Look," she said, her voice becoming softer, more personal. "I know things between you and Mom ended badly, but I was hoping we could separate that from our professional relationship. I've never been anything but supportive of your relationship, even when—" She trailed off meaningfully. "Even when what?" I asked, though I suspected I knew where this was heading. Even when Mom was difficult, I always thought you were good for her, that you brought out her better side. And I know the breakup hurt you. She was trying to rewrite history, to position herself as some kind of ally who'd been secretly supporting me during my relationship with Victoria. It was manipulative and transparent, but also desperately sad in a way that made me feel something I hadn't expected. Pity. Sophia, I said gently, your performance review has nothing to do with your mother. It's based entirely on the quality of work you've produced and your response to feedback. If you want to succeed here, you need to focus on improving your performance rather than trying to negotiate around it. Her face flushed red, and for a moment I saw her mother's rage flash in her eyes. So that's it? You're going to hold some grudge against Mom and take it out on me? I'm not holding any grudges, I said firmly. I'm evaluating your work performance, which has been consistently below our standards. You're being unfair and we both know it. The accusation hung in the air between us. She was essentially calling me a liar, suggesting that I was using my position to punish her for her mother's sins. It was exactly the kind of manipulation Victoria would have tried, and it triggered something cold and hard in my chest. I think this conversation is over, I said, standing. If you have concerns about your performance review, you're welcome to discuss them with HR or Patricia Morgan. But I'd strongly suggest you focus on addressing the performance issues rather than questioning the evaluation process. Sophia stared at me for a long moment, her carefully constructed professionalism completely abandoned. You've changed, she said finally. You used to be kinder. I used to be a lot of things, I replied. That was a different life. After she left, I sat in my darkened office thinking about her parting words. Had I changed? Had the experience with Victoria hardened me in ways I didn't fully recognize? Or was I simply no longer willing to accept disrespect and manipulation from people who thought they could leverage personal history to avoid professional accountability? The next morning brought an email from Patricia Morgan requesting a meeting to discuss the Hartwell siblings' performance. Sophia had apparently followed through on her threat to escalate our conversation. Close the door, Patricia said when I arrived at her office. She was sitting behind her desk with 2 manila folders open in front of her, presumably the twins' personnel files. I understand there was some tension yesterday evening, she continued once I'd settled into the chair across from her desk. Sophia came to me with concerns about her performance evaluation. What kind of concerns? She believes she's being held to unfairly high standards. She also suggested that your personal history with her mother might be influencing your assessment of her work. Patricia's tone was carefully neutral, giving no indication of her own opinion about Sophia's accusations. I appreciated her professionalism. She was gathering information before drawing conclusions. Jennifer Walsh conducts all performance evaluations for research division employees, I said. I don't directly supervise Sophia's day-to-day work or assess her performance. My only involvement is reviewing Jennifer's evaluations and providing input when requested. And Jennifer's evaluation? Detailed concerns about accuracy, attention to detail, and response to feedback. Sophia has struggled with the precision required for our work standards and becomes defensive when errors are pointed out. Patricia nodded, making notes in one of the folders. What about Marcus? Any similar issues? Different challenges. Robert Kim reports that his work quality is acceptable, but he seems to view his current position as temporary inconvenience rather than valuable learning experience. He's been asking about advancement timelines since his second week. Both of them appear to have difficulty adjusting to entry-level responsibilities. Patricia closed the folders and leaned back in her chair. I want to be very direct with you. Hiring the Hartwell twins was a favor to Richard, who felt some obligation toward them despite his divorce from their mother. But this is a business, not a charity. If they can't meet our standards, they'll need to be let go regardless of their family connections. I understand, I said. Do you? Patricia's eyes were sharp, searching. Because Sophia specifically mentioned your relationship with Victoria. She suggested that personal feelings might be affecting your judgment. Are they? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since my first meeting with the twins. Was I being harder on them because of their connection to Victoria? Was I setting them up to fail as some kind of elaborate revenge scheme? I don't think so, I said honestly. But I recognize that I'm not entirely objective where the Hartwell family is concerned. If you'd prefer to reassign them to other senior partners, I'd understand. Patricia studied my face for a long moment. Actually, I think you're exactly the right person to manage this situation. You have legitimate professional standards and no incentive to give them special treatment. If they succeed under your oversight, it will be because they've genuinely earned it. If they fail, it will be because they couldn't meet basic professional requirements. What do you want me to do? Treat them like any other entry-level employees. Hold them to the same standards, provide the same opportunities for growth, and evaluate them based solely on performance. If they can't cut it, we'll let them go. If they can adapt and improve, they'll advance like anyone else. And if Sophia continues to suggest that personal bias is affecting her treatment, then she'll be terminated for insubordination, Patricia said bluntly. I won't have employees undermining their supervisors by making unfounded accusations of bias. Is that clear enough? Crystal clear. Walking back to my office, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Patricia had essentially given me carte blanche to manage the Hartwell situation without worrying about political ramifications. More importantly, she'd made it clear that professional standards would trump personal connections. But as I settled back into my work, I couldn't shake Sophia's accusation that I'd changed, become harder and less kind. Was that true? And if so, was it necessarily a bad thing? The answer came 2 weeks later, in a way I hadn't anticipated. I was reviewing quarterly client reports when Claire buzzed my intercom with an unusual urgency. Mr. Thompson? There's a woman here who says she needs to speak with you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's about the Hartwell accounts. My blood went cold. There were no Hartwell accounts. Richard had divested years ago, and Victoria was bankrupt, which meant only one person would be making that claim. What's her name? I asked, though I already knew. Victoria Hartwell. I sat in my chair for a long moment, staring at my reflection in the darkened computer screen. 3 years. 3 years since I'd walked out of that restaurant and out of her life. 3 years of building my career, proving my worth, becoming the kind of successful professional she'd claimed I could never be without her money. And now she was here, in my office building, asking to see me. Send her in, I said finally. Victoria entered my office like a ghost of her former self. The woman who'd once commanded attention in every room she entered now looked small and diminished, wearing an off-the-rack suit that didn't quite fit and carrying herself with the careful posture of someone trying to project confidence they didn't feel. But her eyes were the same, calculating, manipulative, searching for angles and advantages even in her reduced circumstances. Hello, sweetheart, she said, attempting that old familiar smile. You look well. Victoria, I replied, not standing or offering her a seat. What do you want? If she was hurt by my coldness, she didn't show it. Instead, she settled into the chair across from my desk with the same presumptuous familiarity her daughter had displayed weeks earlier. I want to thank you, she said, for giving Sophia and Marcus this opportunity. I know it can't be easy given our history. There it was already. The manipulation, the attempt to frame her visit as gratitude rather than whatever she'd really come for. They're employees, I said simply. Nothing more, nothing less. Of course, Victoria said quickly. I wanted you to know that I appreciate it, and I wanted to apologize. That surprised me. In all the time I'd known Victoria, I'd never heard her apologize for anything. Apologize for what? For the way things ended between us. For the things I said that last night. She paused, looking down at her hands. I was under a lot of stress with the business, and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair. It was a decent apology as far as it went. But there was something rehearsed about it, something that felt more strategic than genuine. Why now? I asked. Why not 3 years ago? Victoria's composure cracked slightly. Because 3 years ago, I was too proud to admit I was wrong. And because she gestured around my office, taking in the view, the expensive furniture, the obvious markers of success. Because now I can see that I was wrong. About your potential, about what you could accomplish. You've done very well for yourself. Have I? I asked mildly. Don't be modest. Senior partner at one of the city's most respected investment firms. Corner office, 6-figure salary. She paused meaningfully. Everything you used to dream about when we were together. There was something almost wistful in her voice, as if she were remembering happier times. But I knew Victoria too well to take anything at face value. What do you want, Victoria? She was quiet for a long moment, and when she looked up at me, there was something vulnerable in her expression that I'd never seen before. I want my children to succeed, she said simply. They're all I have left. And there it was. The real reason for her visit, the true purpose behind the apology and the flattery. She was here to advocate for Sophia and Marcus, to use whatever influence she thought she still had over me to secure their positions. They're bright kids, she continued, but they've been sheltered. They've never had to work for anything, never faced real challenges. This bankruptcy, losing everything. She shook her head. It's been devastating for them, but it might also be exactly what they need. A chance to prove themselves, to build something on their own merits rather than relying on family money. It was a reasonable argument, and delivered with what seemed like genuine maternal concern. But I could also see the calculation behind it. Victoria trying to position her children's employment as some kind of character-building exercise rather than financial necessity. Torsin, how are they doing? She asked. Really, I mean, are they adjusting well to working life? They're learning, I said diplomatically. That's all I can ask for, Victoria said. But there was something in her eyes that suggested she wanted more specific information. I know Sophia can be intense sometimes. She gets that from me, I'm afraid. But she's brilliant, truly brilliant. And Marcus is more thoughtful, more analytical. He thinks before he acts, considers all the angles. She paused. They're good kids despite their advantages, or maybe because of them. I found myself studying Victoria's face as she spoke about her children. There was genuine love there, genuine pride mixed with concern. For all her faults as a person and a partner, she clearly cared about Sophia and Marcus in a way that seemed authentic. But there was also desperation. The kind of desperation that comes from having lost everything and watching your children face the same fate. I'm not asking for special treatment, she continued. I know you wouldn't give it anyway, and I wouldn't want you to. But if they struggle, if they make mistakes, I hope you'll remember that they're still learning. Everyone deserves a chance to grow, to become better than they were. The irony of that statement, coming from someone who'd spent 2 years telling me I'd never amount to anything, wasn't lost on either of us. Is that what you think I'm doing? I asked. Punishing them for your mistakes. Victoria met my eyes directly for the first time since entering my office. I think you're a better man than I gave you credit for, she said quietly. And I think my children are lucky to have you as their boss, even if they don't realize it yet. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. Finally, Victoria stood to leave. For what it's worth, she said, pausing at the door, I was wrong about you, about your potential, about your worth, about everything. You've become exactly the kind of man I always claimed you couldn't be. And I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to see that. After she left, I sat alone in my office as the afternoon light faded across Manhattan. Victoria's visit had shaken me in ways I hadn't expected. Not because of any lingering romantic feelings. Those had died years ago. But because it forced me to confront the question that had been lurking in the back of my mind since the twins started working here. What kind of person did I want to be in this situation? The vindictive part of me wanted to see them fail, wanted to watch Victoria's children struggle and fail as some kind of cosmic justice for the way their family had treated me. But the professional part of me, the part that had built this successful career through hard work and integrity, knew that taking pleasure in their failures would diminish my own achievements. More than that, it would prove Victoria right about one thing, that success without character was just another form of failure. The resolution came, as these things often do, from an unexpected source. It was a Friday afternoon in December, 3 months after the twins had started at the company. I was preparing to leave for the weekend when Claire buzzed my intercom with unusual urgency. Mr. Thompson, there's been an incident with Marcus Hartwell. Robert Kim needs to speak with you immediately. My first thought was that Marcus had made some catastrophic error in his compliance work, the kind of mistake that could expose the firm to regulatory penalties. But when Robert arrived at my office, his expression suggested something more complicated than simple incompetence. We have a problem, he said, closing my office door behind him. Marcus discovered a potential compliance violation in the Morrison account files. That wasn't what I'd expected to hear. What kind of violation? Trading irregularities that suggest possible insider information. It's subtle. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. But Marcus caught the pattern in the documentation. Robert handed me a folder thick with trading records and analysis notes. He spent his own time over the past 2 weeks building this case, cross-referencing trade dates with earnings announcements and SEC filings. I opened the folder and began reviewing Marcus's work. It was meticulous, thorough, and unfortunately convincing. Someone had been making suspiciously well-timed trades on Morrison stock, always buying just before positive earnings announcements or selling just before negative news. Who has access to Morrison's earnings information before public release? I asked. That's the problem, Robert said grimly. The trades were made by David Chen. My blood went cold. David Chen was one of the senior partners who'd hired me, someone I respected professionally and considered a friend. He was also someone with access to insider information through his seats on several corporate boards. "Are you certain about this analysis?" I asked Marcus, who had been standing quietly near the door during my conversation with Robert. "I've checked it 3 times," Marcus said, and there was no hesitation in his voice. "The pattern is clear, and the timing is too consistent to be coincidental. I know what this means for the firm, for everyone involved. I wouldn't have brought it forward if I wasn't certain." I stared at the documentation, feeling the weight of the situation settling on my shoulders. If Marcus was right, and his analysis looked solid, we were looking at a serious securities violation that could destroy the firm and land David in federal prison. But there was another dimension to this that made it even more complicated. Marcus had uncovered this potential violation while working in an entry-level compliance position, doing exactly the kind of detailed, unglamorous work he'd been complaining about for months. The work he'd thought was beneath him had led to the most significant discovery of his young career. "What do you want to do?" Robert asked. "We follow protocol," I said, though my heart was racing. "This goes to Patricia immediately, and we'll let her decide how to handle it. Marcus, I want you to prepare a comprehensive report documenting your findings. Include everything: your methodology, your sources, your conclusions. This needs to be bulletproof." Marcus nodded seriously. "I'll have it ready by Monday morning." "One more thing," I said, looking directly at him. "You understand that this discovery could have significant consequences for everyone involved, including yourself? If David is guilty, he'll likely be terminated and face criminal charges. If he's innocent, you'll have accused a senior partner of serious misconduct based on circumstantial evidence." "I understand," Marcus said quietly, "but I can't pretend I didn't see this. It would be a violation of my professional ethics and my legal obligations." After Robert and Marcus left, I sat alone with the compliance files spread across my desk. Whatever personal feelings I might have about the Hartwell family, I had to admit that Marcus had done exactly what a good compliance officer should do: identified a potential problem, investigated it thoroughly, and reported it through proper channels. It was also, I realized, exactly the kind of situation that Victoria had been talking about during her visit. Her children were learning, growing, becoming better than they'd been. Marcus had set aside his complaints about his assignment and focused on doing the work well, even when it led to an uncomfortable discovery. Monday morning's meeting with Patricia was one of the most difficult professional conversations of my career. She listened to Marcus's presentation with growing concern, asking pointed questions about his methodology and conclusions. By the end of his report, her face was grim. "This is solid work," she said finally. "Thorough, well-documented, professionally presented." She looked at Marcus with something that might have been respect. "You understand the gravity of what you're alleging?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied. "But the evidence speaks for itself." Patricia turned to me. "Your assessment? Marcus has done everything right," I said. "His analysis is careful and conservative. If anything, he's understated the severity of the patterns he's identified. From a compliance standpoint, we have no choice but to investigate further and report this to the SEC if the evidence holds up." What followed was 3 weeks of intensive investigation involving external forensic accountants, SEC investigators, and FBI financial crime specialists. The firm was essentially paralyzed as everyone waited for the results. David Chen maintained his innocence throughout the investigation, claiming that his trading success was based on legitimate analysis and market insight. But as the investigators dug deeper, the evidence became overwhelming. He'd been using his board positions to gain advanced knowledge of earnings reports and other material information, then trading on that information through carefully structured transactions designed to avoid detection. In the end, David pled guilty to insider trading charges and was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. The firm paid a $2.3 million fine to the SEC, but avoided more serious sanctions because of our cooperation with the investigation. Throughout the crisis, Marcus conducted himself with professionalism and integrity that impressed everyone involved. He testified before the SEC, provided additional analysis when requested, and handled the intense scrutiny without complaint. More importantly, he never tried to leverage his role in uncovering the violation for personal advantage. He didn't demand recognition or early promotion. He simply did his job and let his work speak for itself. The transformation in both twins over the following months was remarkable. Sophia, shaken by her brother's experience, and perhaps by her own earlier confrontation with me, began approaching her work with genuine dedication. Her analysis improved dramatically, and she stopped complaining about the detail-oriented nature of her assignments. Jennifer Walsh's monthly reports showed steady improvement in Sophia's performance, along with notes about her improved attitude and willingness to accept feedback. She's actually become one of my better analysts, Jennifer told me during one of our check-ins. Still has room for improvement, but she's putting in the effort now. Marcus, meanwhile, had earned respect throughout the company for his handling of the David Chen situation. His colleagues in compliance treated him as a peer rather than an inexperienced junior employee, and senior partners began seeking his input on complex regulatory questions. But the most significant change was in how they treated me. Gone was the casual disrespect, the presumption of familiarity, the subtle attempts at manipulation. They addressed me as Mr. Thompson, sought guidance rather than demanding special treatment, and generally conducted themselves as professional employees rather than entitled children. The irony wasn't lost on me that their mother's bankruptcy, the event that had forced them into entry-level jobs, had actually been the best thing that could have happened to them. For the first time in their privileged lives, they were being judged on their merits rather than their family connections. They were learning what I'd learned years earlier, that real success comes from competence, integrity, and hard work rather than inherited advantages. 6 months after the David Chen investigation concluded, Patricia called me into her office for what I expected to be a routine meeting. Instead, she had news that would change everything. "The board has decided to offer you David's former position," she said without preamble. "Managing partner, full equity stake, seat on the executive committee. It comes with a significant salary increase and the opportunity to shape the firm's strategic direction." I sat in stunned silence, processing what she just told me. Managing partner was the second highest position in the company, answerable only to Patricia herself. It represented a level of success that I dreamed about, but never quite believed I could achieve. "Why me?" I asked finally. "Because you've demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and integrity we need," Patricia replied. "Your handling of the Hartwell situation showed that you can manage complex interpersonal dynamics while maintaining professional standards. Your work on the Morrison portfolio restructuring generated significant returns for our clients. And your response to the David Chen crisis showed that you prioritize the firm's reputation and ethical obligations above personal relationships." She paused, studying my face. "You've also shown that you can develop talent even in challenging circumstances. Both Hartwell twins have improved dramatically under your oversight, and Marcus's work on the compliance violation saved this firm from potentially catastrophic damage. That's rare in this business, the ability to bring out the best in difficult people." I thought about the twins, about their transformation from entitled children to competent professionals, about Victoria's visit and her plea that I give her children a chance to grow, about my own journey from that nervous young man at a networking event to someone being offered a managing partnership at one of the city's most respected firms. "I accept," I said. The announcement of my promotion made the financial press, a small item in the Wall Street Journal's Personnel Moves section that I doubt Victoria saw, but word travels fast in New York's financial community, and I knew she'd hear about it eventually. She did, in fact, send me a handwritten note a week later. It was brief and professional, congratulating me on my success and thanking me again for the opportunities I'd provided her children. But there was something in the careful phrasing, the elegant handwriting, that reminded me of the woman I'd once loved, before I learned who she really was. The twins' reactions to my promotion were more immediate and more revealing. Sophia came to my office the morning after the announcement, knocking tentatively rather than walking in as she once had. "Congratulations, Mr. Thompson," she said formally. "I wanted to thank you for everything you've taught me this year. You haven't been easy on me," she continued, "but I understand now that you were preparing me for success rather than trying to make me fail. I've learned more in the past year than I did in 4 years of college." Marcus's response was more subtle but equally meaningful. He sent me a memo outlining several procedural improvements for the compliance department, along with a note saying he hoped his continued contributions could help the firm maintain the highest ethical standards. Both responses showed a maturity and professionalism that would have been unimaginable when they'd first started at the company. They'd learned what I'd learned during my relationship with their mother, that respect has to be earned, that success requires substance, and that privilege without merit is ultimately hollow. As I settled into my new role as managing partner, I found myself thinking often about the strange journey that had brought me to this point. 5 years earlier, I'd been a struggling analyst, grateful for Victoria's attention and financial support. 3 years earlier, I'd been a heartbroken young man walking out of a restaurant after being told I'd be nothing without her money. Now I was in a position of significant authority and influence, respected by my colleagues and peers, financially secure in a way that had nothing to do with anyone else's generosity. I'd proven Victoria wrong about everything: my potential, my worth, my ability to succeed on my own merits. But the real victory wasn't in proving her wrong. It was in becoming the kind of person who could offer her children the opportunities and guidance they needed to become better versions of themselves. It was in maintaining my integrity and professionalism even when presented with opportunities for pettiness and revenge. Victoria had been wrong about many things, but she'd been right about one: success without character is meaningless. The satisfaction I felt in my achievements had nothing to do with outdoing her or punishing her children, and everything to do with building something valuable through honest work and ethical behavior. Sometimes late at night in my corner office overlooking Central Park, I think about that young man who'd crashed a networking event because he couldn't afford his own ticket. I think about his dreams and ambitions, his willingness to work harder than anyone else to prove himself worthy of success. That young man had become exactly who he'd hoped to become, not despite the obstacles and betrayals he'd faced, but because of how he'd chosen to respond to them. He'd learned that the best revenge against those who doubt you isn't to prove them wrong, it's to prove yourself right. And sometimes, if I'm being completely honest, I think about Victoria too. Not with anger or resentment, but with something closer to gratitude. She'd taught me painful but valuable lessons about self-worth, professional integrity, and the difference between success and accomplishment. Her cruelty had forced me to find strength I didn't know I possessed. Her dismissal had motivated me to prove myself in ways I might never have attempted if she'd been supportive. Her children's entitlement had given me the opportunity to demonstrate leadership and mentorship skills I'd never had to develop. In trying to diminish me, she'd actually helped create exactly the kind of successful, confident professional she'd claimed I could never become. The irony was perfect, even if she'd never fully understand it. Victoria Hartwell had told me I'd be nothing without her money. Instead, losing her money, and her support, and her presence in my life had been exactly what I needed to become everything I was capable of being. And now, as managing partner of one of New York's most respected investment firms, with her children as my employees and protégés, I could finally say with complete certainty, she had been wrong about everything that mattered. I wasn't nothing without her money. I was everything I'd ever wanted to be.